So I have some books here that I think you should put on your 2024 to be read list, your 2024 reading list, for a couple of reasons, and I'll explain the reasons as I go. For anybody who's wondering about this massive mark here, it's because I got in a fight with a bear. Here is the bear. And with that being said, let's start the video. So the first book is Narrative Economics. I think, pause. I haven't read this book yet. I've listened to lectures about it, and I have all of Robert J. Schiller's books. And I'm going to try and read it this year, but as you know, I'm addicted to many nonfiction books, so wishes. I think this should be read because there's a lot of hype going around different cryptocurrencies, and I think it's important to be reminded that the increase in price for just assets in general can be heavily driven by stories, by media coverage, or just a good selling point, right? If there's a good story behind the asset, then maybe the price will go up. It's the stories that make us believe in the future of the asset, and as a result, we kind of go away from the fundamentals of the asset, which usually involve math, and people are kind of anxious about math. And so we kind of get this detachment from the actual fair valuation of the price or the asset and the current market price for the asset. There's a lot of things, like even NVIDIA stock was like this. A lot of intelligent people that I know have encouraged me to buy NVIDIA stock when it was trading at like a 55 price to earnings ratio, which is literally insane. So, this book you should definitely put on your reading list. This next book, I started reading, then I stopped reading. And so it's not a book that I have read, but I'm going to try and read it this year. And it is The Penguin History of the 20th Century. You can get any placeholder book will do, any History of the 20th Century book will do. Because I think what will help here is identifying trends. So this book is really great at highlighting different trends that have occurred in the 20th century. So for example, the rise of the East Asian economies, the Cold War, the kind of treaties that were created from say the Second World War onwards. It's kind of internationalism that emerged. Looking at these trends, I think can get you in the right headspace for thinking about the future of just humanity in general, which is really important, especially with now all this new generative AI technology, the changes in currencies. There are a few things that are going on now that could reshape the future with years to come, right? And so thinking about that, maybe trying to get ahead of that and positioning yourself for that is a good idea. And so this book you should read. The Philosophy of Love, The Conditions of Love, The Philosophy of Intimacy. So I have 4 books on love that I was considering, Irvin Yalom's Love's Executioner, The Incurable Romantic. These are also good books, but I chose this book because it's a good starting point, I think. And I put this on here because you're all, as you're following me, now 1 year older. And I think you need to make up your mind about love and intimacy. For me, I'm a very heady person. And I can say with confidence, even though I'm a very intellectual, I like studying math, staying inside, right? Love was important for me. And I think getting a good idea about love was really important. And so I think if you're going to have a meaningful life, you need to make up your mind on the topic of love. There's even a book I recently just got called The Life of Reason. And in the book, he cites I don't know if it was the author, if it was another author that the author cites, but he says science, the paraphrase the quote, it's like science is just trifle and the true meaning of life is love. So science is kind of just like a distraction to keep us busy, but ultimately it's love that we value. And I kind of agree with that. You might not agree with that, but I think as you get older, you should make up your mind before you get to the point where you're so old that it's a bit harder to find love. So yeah, this book is on here. The next book is The Warren Buffett, The Interpretation of Financial Statements by Mary Buffett and David Clark. I recommend this book all the time to both friends and to you guys. And the reason why I recommend this book is because if you really want to start investing, which everybody in New Year, New Me, so on and so forth, they go into, I'm going to start investing, it's going to be my money year, right? Investing is not following markets. As far as I'm concerned, markets are whimsical and unpredictable. Multi-million-dollar computers even struggle to predict markets. You have no chance, right? markets are whimsical, media is whimsical, and everybody has a reason to like sell you on something. So what you should be learning how to do is read the financial data. And reading the financial data is really simple. You just go to sec.gov or whatever country you have. There's usually a Securities Exchange Commission. Download they're usually called 10K reports. There's 10Q reports. These are just annual reports and quarterly reports. Sometimes they're different depending on the country. I think like in the United Kingdom, it's called 20th, something like this. But you download these reports and then you just do simple ratios. Guys, it's really simple ratios, right? So like if you see revenue, you'll see, okay, a really important ratio that this book will teach you about is like a gross margin. Okay, so revenue, you have the revenue and then you divide it by, cost of sales and then revenue, right? So you have your revenue on the bottom, your cost of sales on top. If that's 50%, then you have a strong company that can be price setters rather than price takers, so on and so forth. It's very simple things like this, nothing very difficult. And it's, just read this book and you'll know how to do about like 80 or 70 ratios that are super useful and will help you pick really, really strong companies, as long as you're not compromising. So what's going to happen when you do read this book, if you apply all the standards inside this book, you're going to reject 200 companies before you pick one company. You're usually going to sift through like 100 to maybe even 150 companies. You're going to say no to 149 of them. One of them is going to pique your interest. And even then, the one that piques your interest, you're going to find that they're not going to be good in every category. Some of them might have like questionable measurements. Like maybe they have really good gross margins, really good net profit margins, operating cash flow to operating expenses, healthy ratio. But maybe their revenue only grows when their long-term debt grows. And so you might be like, that's a debt-based growth in revenue. That's a bit suspicious to me, right? You might say that. So, and just read this book. This is a really good book. It's probably one of the top 5, if not the number 1 book when it comes to financial accounting for me. Keeps it simple, keeps it straightforward, and I absolutely recommend this book. This next book, The Cambridge Companion to Pragmatism. This is a bias, okay, but if you're not a pragmatist yet when it comes to philosophy, then I don't know why you've wasted your time. You need to go straight to pragmatism. That's my opinion. So for those who aren't familiar, pragmatism comes in a variety of formulations, but the one I tend to agree with is this kind of radical empiricism. So like, the example I always give is like if we have someone who is a moral realist and someone who is a non-moral realist and they're disagreeing about the nature of good and evil on the topic of murder, then a pragmatist is only going to care about whether they're actually murdering each other or not. Don't care about the classification. Same thing can be said for the debates between creationism and evolutionary theory. As long as an animal is changing over time and we can predict the trend and there's a consistent change or whatever, I actually don't care if you want to say God did it or evolution did it. Don't really care, right? It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that we can observe the change and the change is happening. As far as I'm concerned, the debating the metaphysics of the change is a waste of time. I mean, a waste of time unless you're trying to waste your time by entertaining yourself with intellectual things. I get that metaphysics is fun. I'm not saying don't do metaphysics, but I am saying don't do metaphysics and then think you're going to get to some kind of universal truth, because you're just going to get, it's a language game, right? It's like you frame it this way, someone else frames it the opposite way. Neither one of you have a solution to the Munchausen's trilemma, so what are we doing here, right? So I recommend this book for that reason. There's a good overview of the different types of pragmatism that you can find in the world, and you can pick one of them. They're all pretty good. Next book, the Oxford Handbook of the Philosophy of Death. So I read this book maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and again, since we're all now 1 year older, we should probably come up with a opinion about the nature of our own mortality, right? And on top of that, there's some interesting topics about like, I was exposed to this topic through this book, which is like, can you cause harm to those who are dead, right? Like retrospective harm, I think they called it or whatever. Can you cause harm to people who are dead? So like disrespecting graves or harming the grandchildren of a grandparent that died. Does that count as harm towards the grandparent? There's also about this notion of what does it even mean to be alive? Because what it means to be alive could then inform what it means to be dead. I have this personal view that, like, to me, intuitively, it doesn't seem to make sense that we go from having a point of view to having no point of view. And I mean, that doesn't mean that there necessarily has to be an afterlife, but to me, it just doesn't intuitively make sense. And so maybe Maybe I'm just never going to understand it and it's never going to make sense and there is just a nothingness after life. But maybe you adopt some kind of new point of view. When you die, I don't know. I tend to lean towards naturalism, right? That consciousness is inside the brain. And once the brain's gone, you are gone. But there's a lot of interesting topics about the nature of death that I brought into this, and it might help you come up with your own opinion about your own mortality. This next book is another book I haven't read. I intend to read it. I know it's kind of cheating, isn't it? But I only put this on here because I couldn't think of another book on aesthetics that is as exhaustive as this. That would be as comprehensive, right? So I think people should get educated on aesthetics in general. And the reason why is because I think it makes life a lot more interesting. Again, it's not necessarily the most practical topic to get educated in, but it does add like a unique filter onto reality. So if you're thinking, for example, like, think about like a rational approach to beauty. If I give you a blank white canvas, you might go, man, that's not that interesting. And if I give you a colorful canvas, you're going to go, wow, that's really interesting, right? You might say that the colorful canvas is the one that's beautiful. But if I show you pale white skin, right, it's just bland skin, or it could be brown skin, it could be black skin, it could be any kind of skin. It's just a monotonous color. You wouldn't say that's ugly. But if I gave you just a monotonous canvas, you would say that's ugly. And then you could compare like the skin of a cheetah versus like the skin of a human, and you could see that, well, the skin of a cheetah is a lot more aesthetic, rationally speaking. And so I've always come up with this distinction that there's like an animalistic sense of beauty that humans have when it comes to mating, and then there's a rational sense of beauty that we can create. And I think in a rational sense, you could say that humans are actually not beautiful, they're ugly. But in an animalistic sense, you can say that humans are beautiful. And that only comes, this kind of thinking, this kind of painting reality in different ways, only comes from things like studying aesthetics. And I think that makes life a lot more interesting. So that's why this book is on here. But you could pick any book on aesthetics. I think you should just get educated on aesthetics. Next book, Outlive by Peter Attia. I only think this book should be read because he has a really unique take to the methodologies used for nutrition sciences. Not a unique take, but he encourages us to go away from randomized controlled trials when randomized controlled trials are limiting. I think he says it's evidence-based versus evidence-informed is the distinction he makes. And I'm pretty much like a zealot for randomized controlled trials. I won't take supplements unless there's a randomized controlled trial. I won't adopt a dietary pattern unless there's a randomized controlled trial. And this, even like with this debate about fasting and versus caloric restriction, stuff like this, right? Like, I tend to be a zealot for randomized controlled trials, but he has a point that I think can push you into the right direction, where it's that randomized controlled trials have a limited amount of time you can do them for, and some of the things that we're looking to change, like longevity interventions, need to be done in a 40-year period or a 50-year period. And so he goes to this thing called evidence-informed, which usually just involves understanding a theory of a mechanism of action. So you take a mechanism of action and then you extrapolate, and you're kind of like triangulating, he says. You're kind of honing in on a particular outcome that you want by using these different mechanisms of action. The problem, of course, is that there's a lot of things that have had mechanisms of action, but when you do randomized control trials, they don't get the outcomes that you would predict based on the mechanisms of action. So anyways, the point why I'm adding this book is because there's a lot of hype around things like fasting, seed oils, or carnivore diets versus vegan diets. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the nutrition area. And I think it's important that we're talking about the methodologies used to support these worldviews very, very clearly, and what we think some standard of evidence supports. And that's why I like this book, is because he does that. He doesn't claim that his worldview is necessarily true. He claims that it's based off of this evidence and this specific type of methodology, which might be a good standard for you, might be a bad standard for you, right? We can talk about that. This is what we should be doing. And I think that is a great outlook or a great mindset to have in these discussions. That's why I'm having this book on your to be read list. The last one is Philosophy in the Flesh, George Lakoff, Embodied Cognition and the Challenge to Western Thought. I've recommended this book probably like 4 or 5 times in this channel, and I will continue to do it because it is a great book for challenging this notion of like disembodied philosophy. You can take the disembodied worldview, right? Like that there is a logical truth, and it's like an abstraction that you can discover through reasoning, and it's like a truth of the world or a universe, whatever. It's not like you can't naturalize it. But what this does is it takes philosophy and it naturalizes it. And it means that like the reasoning that we do is a byproduct of our physical embodiments. So a great and maybe easy example to understand here is if you think about the word over and how we conceptualize it when using it in a sentence. If I say I threw the ball over the hill versus I walked over the hill versus a plane flew over a hill, right? Or you could say that John is standing over Jane. The word over here is going to depend on the perceptual context quite a bit. And so the thinking, the semantics we attribute to that word will depend, right? Because like when you say John threw the ball over the hill, you understand that there's some distance between the ball and the hill, right? When you say John walked over the hill, you kind of understand that John has to have contact with the hill so he's on top of it directly. And when you say a plane flew over a hill, well, we don't perceive planes flying low very frequently. And so we're likely to understand that the plane is really, 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 really high above the hill. And when you say something like, John is standing over Jane, you might imagine somebody standing over their shoulder, right? This kind of perceptual information changes how we think about things. And that's what embodied cognition is all about. He also says that there is innate, not innate concepts, but like innate ways of schematizing experience. So for example, like the fact that I can reach for an object, I think he calls it the goal path schema, right? The fact that I can reach for an object and I have the intention to reach for that object. And when I reach it, it's like a dopamine reward kind of goes off. It's like, that's the goal. That's what I wanted. That's the goal I achieved. That kind of neural pattern developed when you're a baby can then be used to engage in abstract, non-literal thinking. So it's not that the world is shaped like this. It's that you're using the neurons you used to develop that reaching behavior to then engage in abstract reasoning. So I have a math goal of studying math for 10,000 hours before age 50, right? Same neurons that I use for reaching are the neurons I'm using to make that abstract statement that I just made, right? That's the idea. And that has a lot of, the reason why this is important is because it has a lot of implications for things like AI, for thinking things. Even has a lot of implications for how we understand animal cognition, because what that means is that reason is no longer this higher order process that you get through university education. It's a result of the actual motor movements you do on a day-to-day basis, or the physical things you do on a day-to-day basis, which means that to some extent, if we can develop a goal-oriented schema by reaching for an object, then so could a chimpanzee, right? And so that would change maybe how you treat animals. It's an important book to challenge the traditional Western way of thinking about reason and philosophy. So those are some of the books I recommend for your 2024 reading list. I think like 2 or 3 of those will be on my reading list, and the other ones I've already read. They're all pretty good books, and I can say you won't regret reading any of them. That being said, guys, let me know what you have on your 2024 reading list. 2024 reading list. And I'd be curious because my list is not nearly complete. I have some books to add. And bye-bye for now.